everybody, and welcome to another edition of Plumbing Solutions Educational Series. In this segment, I want to talk about lavatories. Now, a lavatory is a combined thing. It's a faucet, it's a bowl or a basin, and a drain assembly. Now, whenever I highlight any one specific fixture, I like to do a little bit of history behind it. Well, when doing my research on lavatories, I really couldn't find a whole lot, because this is just something that kind of met a need and it just evolved over time. But what I did find was, going back to the ancient Romans, they had basically small fountains that looked very similar to this. It had a spout and it had a basin to it, but all of their plumbing was done off of gravity, so it ran all the time. It was just a little fountain. They did have some valves and they did have some diverters and things, and they were in control of their water, but it wasn't like this where you could turn it on and off at the fixture. It ran night and day, 24/7. After the fall of the Roman Empire, we go into the plumbing dark ages, and you don't see anything like that. We go back for hundreds of years to what they call the wash basin, which is a pitcher of water and a bowl, and it met the needs. Now, here in America, being the frontier and pioneer people that we were, we had that set up for a long time. Then after that, we get the gate valve. It was invented somewhere in the 1840s, which is actually that what we're kind of used to, where you turn it, crank it down, and it shuts it off, or it turns it on. Now, those early sinks had one spout for hot and one spout for cold, and you just kind of mixed it into the bowl. Now, along came this guy, and he burned the fool out of himself on one of those hot sides and said there's got to be a better way. Now, that man's name was Alfred Moen, and he created the Moen faucet, which was a single handle faucet. This is actually a Moen faucet, and it mixes itself inside, so it comes out already tempered and ready for you to go. And then we get to about the 1960s, where you're seeing this style faucet in every home in America. Now, during this time, a lot of companies are being born. You got Moen. This is a Delta. This is another one that we actually carry in our inventory back there. You got Kohler. A whole bunch of different ones. And like Delta has a bunch of sister groups. They've got their cheaper line, which is Peerless, and then they've got a higher end, which would be their Brizzo and stuff. But that's about it on the history. Now, when it comes to your pop-up assemblies, I couldn't find anything on this guy. And if you're an old guy like me and you remember going to great-grandmother's house, she had a little rubber stopper that went down in there, and it was on a chain. But I really don't know who came up with this. If I had to make a guess, I'd probably say it was Kohler, because Kohler was doing a lot of tubs, they were doing a lot of sinks, and they were kind of a large company at the time. But that pretty much covers it on history. Now, we're going to take some of these apart. I'm going to show you some pieces and parts to them, and then of course we'll continue our training videos. We'll go out into the training center and we'll move along with this series. Okay, moving along in our faucet series. I've got three of our most popular ones here, and I'd like to touch base on this one first. This is the Moen Chateau single handle, similar to the one we talked about in the history. It's a single handle faucet put out by Moen. This one is in the chrome finish. Moen's a little different. It doesn't have like a shank with a basin nut, a plastic basin nut. It's got these little bars and these little spacers with a regular style nut. And when attaching this to your countertop or your drop-in sink, you're going to put that bar on there with the spacer and the nut. Now, in some of your thicker granite applications, you're not going to use that little spacer. This nut can be kind of hard to get onto sometimes because you can't really use a deep wall socket. You can get on it with your channel locks, but it can be a task sometimes. I prefer just to use a little wrench. Now this does have these little copper supply line type tubes that when you're under the sink, if you twist your supply line too hard, you could kink or bend that or break it and pretty much damage the faucet. But something one of our trim installers, one of our technicians pointed out to me the other day is when installing this, since it's not like the shank piece, which we're going to get to when we look at these other ones, you can go ahead and before you drop this in your in the holes, you can go ahead and mount your supply lines, and you can put your wrench on that brass nut there, and then of course your channel locks on the top of the supply line. Go ahead and secure that and then drop this down into your bowl or the holes in your countertop. So you can go ahead and take that step out of it, and like I said, doing it outside, you're less likely to twist, bend, or kink these brass pieces. Now, we do new construction, so you're not gonna really be working on these things a whole lot, but every now and again you might get some sand or something like that in it, and you're gonna have to take it apart. Most faucets have something similar, but this has a hot and cold indicator on it. You're gonna pop that out with your fingernail. Some of them are hard and you might have to use a razor knife or something like that. And then there's a little Allen nut inside there that you can get your little Allen wrench on. Sometimes they're kind of hard to get lined up to find that thing, but it's in there. And you undo that little thing and you will be able to remove that handle. There then is a trim ring here that should just pop right off, and you'll be able to get to that cartridge. You can get your channel locks on there, undo that, pull that cartridge out, clean it up, get all the sand and dirt or whatever might be stuck in it out of there, and put it back together. Now, in an older application, if the cartridge is actually bad, you might have to replace it. But that's how you would get into the cartridge on a Moen. And then of course it all goes back together. Nice and neat. And put your little hot cold indicator back in there. The other thing that you might have to check on this, if it's running weird, you know, you might think you have some sand in there, is the aerator. Now this is what I call a standard type aerator. You just unscrew it, it comes out. There's your little aerator in there. There is a water saver, it's a little pink thing in there. You can take that out if you had to. Sometimes these things get clogged so bad with little fine pieces of sand that you're gonna have to just replace the whole thing. Another point about faucets I'd like to talk about is they all come with some type of gasket or grommet that goes underneath them, and when you're installing it, you're going to want to make sure that's straight and lined up nice and neat. We also recommend caulking it, putting a little bit of clear caulk in there, something that's not, you know, it's going to dry clear, it's not going to be a nasty white caulk line, a caulk edge. We pretty much do that on all of our faucets. But that's going to be your little Moen Chateau. This one also comes in a two-handle variety. Moen does have different models, but this is the popular one for us and we see a lot of it. Peerless is the next one I've got here. This is, here again, one of our real popular ones that we use a lot. This is, like I said, it's the Peerless. This one is in oil rub bronze, which is a very popular color nowadays. A little bit different than the Moen because it has these brass shanks and a plastic basin nut, and this is what you would use to secure it to the countertop. Peerless pretty much only has two different lav faucets out there. This one is considered a low arc because the way the spout comes. We have another one that is a high arc, which just comes up a little bit higher. It's the same design. They're both a two-handle style. One of the drawbacks with Peerless is the length of these shanks. Now, they're long enough to handle a drop-in bowl or any of your standard kind of sinks where the holes are in the sink. Formica countertops, cultured marble works just fine. The real thin marble works great, but some of the real thick stuff that we're seeing a lot of now, you just don't have quite enough room because you have to put your basin nut on there and then you have to secure your supply line to it. And if you've only got so many threads showing, you're never going to get tight enough. So we had to come up with what they call a rosette washer and the hex nut. And we use these on those thicker granite applications because it gives you that extra thinness, I guess, so you can put your supply line all the way up on there. Now, the drawback from this one versus the Moen, you can't put these supply lines on and then drop it down in the hole because the way the nuts work, you have to drop it in the hole, secure it with your basin nut or your rosettes, and then you can put your supply line on later. This one also has the grommet that goes underneath. There is a groove that runs around here that I found works really great. If you take that clear caulk and you just squeeze a little bit down in that groove, it'll save you in the long run from some leaks. Now, here again, you might get some sand in this one as you're going along. These handles come off. You have to pop off the little indicator. These are just marked H and C. And then you can get into this handle with a Phillips head screwdriver and undo that screw. And your handle will come right off, which exposes that cartridge. There's a bonnet nut here that you have to undo with a pair of pliers, and you can get in here to pop out this little plastic cartridge. Now I'm going to show you on the Delta later. Peerless has done everything they can to try to save money. The new lead-free brass that's out there is expensive, so that's why they shortened that shank just a little bit to save that little bit of money. The cartridges are full plastic except for the little metal piece at the bottom, and it does actually use the old spring and seat technology down there, which Delta is famous for. And Peerless is a sister company to Delta. It's just kind of their, I guess you could say, builder grade faucet. It's still a really good faucet, but they've tried to make it where it's more affordable for the production style builders. But yeah, if you've got a problem and you check for sand or something, you can pull that cartridge out. The next thing would be, this one does have an aerator, very similar to the Moen. It's on the outside. You can take that apart and get in there and clean the sand out. If it's too bad, you might have to replace that aerator. Then you can put your handle back together. Something I ran into a lot with this guy in warranty was the handles come loose, and you just have to pop that cap off and tighten that screw up. Now you don't want to tighten it too much because it's plastic and you can mess up the shaft there on that cartridge. But that's our Peerless in oil rub bronze. We use this one a whole lot. Delta. Alright, I have got a Delta Linden DST model here. This one is in the satin nickel or brush nickel. The first thing you're going to say, well, what's wrapped all the way around it? Now, what DST stands for is Diamond Seal Technology. And what that means is it comes with its supply lines already attached to it. Reason for this is it gives us one less place to leak. We don't have that extra joint here, and it frees these shanks up to where Delta doesn't have to use lead-free brass because this is never going to have water in it, so it's plastic. And then Delta has its own little plastic basin nuts. This faucet's going to be good for pretty much everything out there. Any style, thickness of granite, anything like that. And because you're not trying to put a supply line on this shank, you're not going to have to worry about using those rosettes or anything like that. I'm a fan of Delta just because I'm a Delta guy. Most plumbers are going to be Delta, Kohler, Moen, you know, it's just what they're used to. They've got the tools to work on it. I prefer Delta. But now Delta, if you have an issue with sand and you need to get in here, they're going to have a little set screw under the handle, which is an Allen wrench. And pretty much Delta's Allen wrench, it's going to be the same size for most just about everything they've got out there. And there you go, the handle comes off. When you get in here, you're going to notice something different. Delta uses a solid brass stem instead of what Peerless had, which was the plastic one. This is probably going to hold up a little bit better. Your handles aren't going to want to wiggle as much. But same deal here, you'll take that bonnet nut off and you can pull that cartridge out and get into that cartridge. If you ever had to replace one, that's how you would go about it. Sometimes some of the Delta models out there are going to have a little gray plug, or they're going to have an indicator which would be blue or red in there, and you'd have to get that out in order to get to your wrench. The other thing about Delta that's kind of unique nowadays is it doesn't really have that outside aerator. It's up in here, and you're going to have a special aerator wrench, which it comes with it. It's just in new construction. A lot of times we put these things in drawers and they end up missing. But there's your aerator. It'll come out like that. It's got the water saver, that little pink thing in there. You can take that out if you want to kick the flow up. Of course, with those water savers, the manufacturers recommend that you leave those right where they are and you don't take them out. But sometimes the tankless water heaters really don't like those. So there's our Delta DST with its supply lines on there. Here again, this is a really popular one for us. You're going to see this guy on some of the higher end houses. We do have a lot of builders that prefer these. This does come in chrome, it does come in the bronze, and then of course this is the satin nickel. Delta does also have a lot of different varieties out there. This is the Linden, they have a Leland, they have a Windermere, and it's just the design. The handles are a little bit different. They turn a different, way as far as the curves on it go. But I like this one. This one is very popular amongst our builders. Now, to finish off your lavatory, you're going to have your drain assembly. Some people call it a tailpiece, some people call it a pop-up assembly. There's not a whole lot of differences across the brands and stuff. You're pretty much looking at two different styles. This one is called your 50/50 because it's half of it's plastic, half of it's metal. There's some cheaper ones out there that is a lot more plastic involved, but these are the two that we're going to see, the 50/50 and then the solid metal, which this one is typically what you get in the Delta kit. And here again we have your bronze, your satin nickel, and your chrome. Now these things, what they're designed to do is stop the sink. You pull up on the lever, which is your pop-up rod here. You pull up on that, which goes in the top of the sink. It's going to pull up on your drain piece and close it, and you push down and it's going to open it. Now when these things come out of the box, it comes with its little connecting rod and its little pop-up rod here, kind of taped together. You're going to have to take this apart and you'll undo this. A lot of them have moved into this wing nut style, which you can just do with your fingers. But the fancier, more expensive ones, you're gonna have a metal nut, and you're gonna have to put a pair of pliers on that to tighten it down. Inside here, you're gonna have a series of washers. You're gonna have a rubber washer and then a plastic seat. You're gonna put that rubber washer in, and like that, and you're gonna make sure that that's in there, or it's never gonna seal properly. And with this one, you're gonna have to put it together and tighten that down. But here's one I got put together. This is the mowing style. It's got the 2 wings on it, but these are designed to do by hand. Inside of there, you're gonna have your little washer piece and that plastic seat. But yeah, you're gonna have to put the rod in here. It lines up with the hole on the popper. And this, you're all gonna have to do this under the sink. There's no way to do it out of the sink. But when you're taking these things apart and stuff, just remember there's all kinds of little seals and stuff. This is just like your little compression ferrule. That's gonna have to go in here when you put this guy together. Of course, I'm gonna do install here in a bit. This is just a brief overview of what these guys do and what they can do. But this is pretty much your pop-up assembly.